So yeah. Um, well, we're recording. Who are you to start?
Cool. I am John Hambone McGuire. I'm a podcast producer, a musician, now I guess a game designer as well, and I'm from the Garden State of New Jersey.
I've always loved that Jersey has the moniker of the Garden State because all I've ever
Yeah.
known is like Elizabeth and Hoboken and Jersey City and Trenton.
Right, which would kind of lend itself to that whole idea of New Jersey, the armpit of America.
Yeah.
However, I think because of that, we as Jersey folk need to kind of step it up with the title and say we're from the Garden State of New Jersey, which in all fairness, people would say, yeah, tomatoes, but cranberries are the number one export from my state.
That's fair. I always forget about that. Every time I drink some ocean spray, I'm getting a little bit of Jersey in my mouth.
You certainly are.
Um,
I
but yeah, so I'll give a brief, I guess, overview of my introduction to you, which is honestly quite simple. I don't know how I first heard about it, but I've been listening to the Vintage RPG podcast, which you are half of, um, since its inception. I don't think I learned about it through Unwinnable, which is Stu, your co-host and like friend of many years, I think.
Yeah, Stu and I have been friends for probably 15 years or so at this
Yeah.
point.
I mean, it that was one of those things that was like immediately apparent when I started listening, even before I think that was like openly discussed. It was just like, oh, these two dudes absolutely know each other really well.
Yeah.
But yeah, I don't think I learned about it through Unwinnable, which is Stu's periodical. Um, so I'm not quite sure how I did, but I got hooked very early on. Um, it's an excellent show.
Thanks,
Uh,
man.
yeah, it's a really it straddles the line between insider and outsider in a way that I like a lot, that I think most things fail to do. They really nail either the deep inside or like deep outside. And it's very rare to find something that mixes those as well as you guys do. So, kudos on that. But I know you also have other shows that you're a part of or work on.
Yes, I am the co-host of My Thai Happy Hour, which we've been doing now for almost 5 years. I occasionally dabble with the Casual Interactions podcast. That was kind of more of a way for me and my friends Frank and Sean to kind of get back together and tell some old road stories and just kind of be connected and do something together. So that's on indefinite hiatus. What other shows do I do? Oh my God, yes, I'm about to be the host of Expert Minutes. The show is a 15-20 minute interview show where I interview a lot of insiders in the entertainment business, and they kind of tell a little bit more about their story and their backgrounds and how they got to where they are, and kind of give you like tips and tricks to work your way into the game and into that kind of realm of business, if you will. So that's going to air at sometime in January. I interview all UK TV and entertainment business personalities. So that's pretty cool. It just feels so far away because I started working on it during the early stages of the pandemic, and now it's finally coming out. And I think that's all the shows I work on. I do like little.
Is that a world you were in before, like what I know you for now? Were you like in the entertainment business?
Yeah, I mean, I was a touring musician for most of my life. I always had one foot in the entertainment business in various different degrees and different places, and I was always the friend of a friend who knows a guy.
Huh. I mean,
But
I
also,
buy that. Like that's
yeah,
the vibe you give off.
yeah, to my, it's a blessing and a curse, I would definitely say, and I love it. I love rock and roll so much. It's the only thing I think when I was a kid that I ever really wanted to be. I just wanted to be a musician. I wanted to be in the business. In fact, I went to Catholic high school in North Arlington, New Jersey, which is a town over from where I live. And on the very first day of school, they pull you into like this like little weird building that was not a rectory and not quite a church. It was just, I think, a house where all the clergy lived. And they were like, we're going to give you this little piece of paper, and we want you to write down like what you want to be, whatever you want to be. And I was like, I want to be in a band. I want to be a musician. And I wrote that down on that little piece of yellow scrap paper. And they didn't even give you like real like pre-cut pieces of paper, like write your destiny on this piece of paper. They were just like, yeah, here's like, we just ripped a little piece of yellow paper off this other piece of yellow paper, pass it around to the next guy, write it down. And you could imagine no one would ever keep that, but I did, and it was the exact words I wrote were, I want to find my success in music. And I stumbled upon it like years later again, in the back of one of my wallets when I was in my first band getting ready to like go on the road. And I went down to the FedEx Kinko's around the corner from my house where we used to make the band flyers and posters. And I had it laminated, and it's still laminated in one of my old wallets still to this day. I just stopped carrying it around with me because I just didn't want to ultimately lose it. So I still have it still to this day. I was 14, 15 when I did that. And now I'm 41. So
I get it. There's a box of things that I just don't trust to have in my person wherever I'm living at a time. That
same.
it lives in my dad's attic upstate, and in there's a book. It's not the yearbook from my sixth grade. It's some like little other book that gave you like a few pages to write
Right.
important things down on whatever. But there was a field of what do I want to be when I grow up, and mine was just filled out with one word, which was tycoon.
That's
Um,
awesome.
and that was what I
That's
apparently what I
baller.
wanted to be as a kid.
Yeah.
I just wanted to
Yeah.
own everything. So yeah, not much has changed.
Yeah.
Now I've just lowered my. It's not everything. I just want to own all books. Um,
Right. You picked one thing, and I think that's a good thing to pick unless you have back problems.
yeah, exactly. Let me say, packing up my books. Oh boy, I need to
Oh yeah.
stretch more. Um,
Yeah.
my
Yeah.
body has fallen apart this year, so that was a fun way to discover that. Um, but yeah, so this is ostensibly a games podcast. Mostly everyone on has been in the analog game sphere. Literally above my head right now on the overlay, it says designers in conversation. Um,
Awesome.
I know I know you as a commentator first and foremost,
Right.
right? Um, but we talk not infrequently. Um, Definitely more through the pandemic. I mean, we only met this past year, like literally like 12 months ago. Um,
Yeah. At PAX Unplugged.
at PAX Unplugged. But this year you have begun taking your first forays into designer life. Um, coming from a somewhat nerdy background, having friends who are in this world, um, what was what was the thought process there of just like finally doing it? Was it just you're doing vintage RPG and talking about games all the time, and you're just like, well, fuck it, I guess I got to make one.
That's a great question, and a little bit. It wasn't so much doing it with vintage RPG that was like I finally just have to do this. I, years ago when I finally got into games, and I was lucky enough that I had friends who kind of dragged me into D&D at age 25. Um, and I definitely used games throughout the years as a way to keep me out of trouble. And then, kind of learning and falling in love with board games and seeing like how robust. I mean, we have a board game club down at the clubhouse at Stu's place where pre-pandemic every Friday night we'd be there. Like someone would buy a new game, we'd play the game to death. We'd have our favorite games that we'd play in rotation, and like through that I started really understanding like how games worked, and like it wasn't just my favorite board game, which is Clue, and other kind of Milton Bradley shit that you had growing
Great
up.
game.
Yeah, it's still to this day. I own 4 different versions of it, and I'm not planning on stopping anytime soon. Best version ever. It's a little sidebar here. Golden Girls. The OP puts it out. You will not
Yeah.
regret it. Oh, it's fantastic. I digress, though. I started kind of, really like just understanding and falling in love with board games. So I initially, like, about a year or two ago, I had an idea for a board game, and I was kind of kicking it around. And, every so often I would realize that in my life, I've always been the sidekick or the side man. I've always helped other people to kind of achieve their dreams. And over the past several years, especially for like the last year and a half, like when I got sober, I started really trying to turn it around and focus on my dreams and the things that like make me happy. And finally, like believing in myself enough that, you know, I knew I could do this. I knew if I just sat down and did it, I could do it. Is the classic thing where like everyone loves you but you hate yourself,
Yeah.
and trying to kind of get over that hurdle and being like, no, like if I'm good enough to help someone else get to that next level, I can get myself there too. So this year obviously for all of us has been a fucking shit show. We've been beat up all pretty bad by this year, and you know, especially being part of like my first year of sobriety, there's a lot of layers I think you peel away from yourself as you were kind of getting to know yourself again for the first time, and
Oh
kind
yeah.
of you're taking stock on like what needs to come and what needs to go, and like you really understand at that fundamental level like what's important to me. And something that was like so important to me was all the stories that I'd kind of write in my own head but I never dared to tell. And also like what was important to me this year was playing games like with people like you, and like lifelong friends and then new friends and strangers over Discord, and bringing people together and trying to find that fundamental place where like everyone um is cool, everyone's equal, everyone's able to kind of like be a part of something and not feel excluded or like they can't, and trying to find a game where that kind of lined up for everybody. It's difficult because even D&D is a certain degree exclusionary in a way where it's still, even though it's supposed to be accessible, it's still a big hurdle to overcome for a lot of people. And
Yeah,
people
I
see a
mean,
book that's
I
400 pages.
yeah, I mean, yeah, at least, right? That's
Yeah.
especially with modern D&D where like 400 pages might just be the PHP. Um
Yeah.
it's one of those things where you're right. I think we assume D&D as a baseline when it's like, "Oh, I can get all my friends into games." D&D is actually an incredibly bad starting point because of the complexity of it.
Yeah. Well, I mean, for me, I make the joke on our show all the time. Like, I do have some RPG books. I have like my best friend lives in the same building as me, and we got a hoard of old D&D stuff from a dude who was moving years ago. So I have a glut of D&D stuff, but I keep only like a certain amount of books down here because like it kills me to have to with my back like carry multiple books places. And and I like books better than PDFs, but that's a different argument. However, so I'm doing all this stuff, and I kind of had these stories that I wanted to tell, and my best friend, she was the Notorious Narratives podcast, and she was telling me a story about like Point Nemo, which was an episode that they were going to do. And in my head, I started firing on all cylinders suddenly, and I had all these crazy ideas based off the story she was telling me. And Point Nemo was actually a real place.
Yeah, it's the uh, farthest point from any land on the planet, right?
Right, spaceship graveyard, the whole nine. And then I kind of came up with this story, and she just looks at me as she's done many times through the years, like when she was like, Hambone, you should go to therapy. Hambone, maybe. Yeah. She's like, then you should write it. Because I was like, oh man, maybe someday like someone could turn it into a book or something. Because her husband's a writer, and she's like, you should write this. And then I went down the basement and I did. And so I also I didn't want to use another system that existed before. I started with like the D100 system. I bounced back with a couple things, and then I just invented my own system. My friend George, my best friend whose building I live in with them. He's my partner in this. We've had little businesses together for years. We played in bands together for years. He's the person I trust with my life, and he came up with a cool combat system. We put our heads together, and now we have 3-2-1 action, which is the game system that we wrote together. And now I wrote Adventures, and I'm really stoked.
So, a question that I'm always interested in when I talk to first-time designers, especially ones who have some kind of back history as a GM or a player, or even just in board games, right, outside of RPGs, is what did you find to be either more rewarding or more natural? The module writing part, the kind of raw laying out of the story, or the mechanics writing part of the system that you designed?
The actual mechanics writing part, because when you play games, when you read stuff, like when you watch television, when you listen to music, like even if you don't feel like you're learning anything, you're still learning so much.
Mm-hmm.
And there is that whole I can't mentality that so many people suffer from, myself included. Like you end up shooting yourself down before you actually take the field. And I was like, I don't know if I could write a rule set. And then I just started doing it. And then I was like, well, I've read the Player's Handbook. I've read Cthulhu. I've read all these other books, and like I know how they're supposed to look. So I just formatted it like that. And then I was like, so how would rules work? And I was like, well, then I'm just going to do this. And out of nowhere in my brain, and the little gray cells, all this like knowledge and bullshit that I didn't think was there suddenly. And then the next thing you know, I've got like an 18-page rule set. It's probably really about 12 pages, but I put the font really big because of my special eyes. And and I was like, holy crap, I did it. And then I just kept going. And writing the stories is different because it's one thing that I've realized, because I've play tested it a lot. I've had the privilege to play test it a lot over the past like few months. There is that thing where I know it, I understand it, and I can tell it to you. But now what happens when someone else has to read it who's not me, who doesn't understand it, who didn't write it, like trying to get it to translate to someone else to be able to run it, that I thought was a big challenge. But putting all the other parts together, like conceptualizing monsters, that was fun. That was easy.
So it actually leads into a question that I was planning on visiting after a few more steps, but since it's already up, there are a lot of theories about what's the fundamental utility of a role-playing game book, right? Is it as inspiration? Is it as essentially a technical manual? A comparison that's been getting some ground recently that I actually like a lot is a cookbook. When you go through role-playing games, right?
Right.
What are you, and this definitely connects to, what are you trying to communicate with Point Nemo? How did you approach this thing as a fundamentally user-facing document? What do you approach role-playing game books as? How do you interact with them? What makes you excited in their construction?
So a little truth time here. I've never read a RPG book cover to cover. I will skim it for the stuff that I need. I will try my damnedest every time I get a new one to kind of read it cover to cover, but it hits a point where, like, I dropped out of college multiple times. Like, I don't want to read a textbook. I just don't. I like to be entertained, and in my life, and in all the places I've been in my life, I've always noticed that you get the most mileage out of a joke. You get the most mileage out of human connection.
Mm-hmm.
Years ago, I was also a traveling salesman. Can you believe it? I sold Vitamix machines. I was the guy standing in Costco trying to get you to buy a Vitamix. And in the end of the day, a product is a product. But if you can find a way to connect with someone on an emotional level, you will be able to get them to understand what you're trying to get them to do, or get them to buy, or get them to be a part of. So I approach this like, if I was reading this, right, I would want to read it like it was as light as possible. And I mean, granted, I guess like 12 or 18 pages of rules all said and done by the time we're done finishing up on it. But like, it's still like, that's it. That's the whole rule book right there. That's everything you need. And through it, I make like little jokes. I make little comments, like, and just kind of help you visualize it more. Like, there's a thing I have in there about like using a bow and arrow, and I say, well, I know from personal experience, because I've been to Ren Fair, that using a bow and arrow is hard, and here's why this is a penalty to do this. Like, little things like that to get your players and the people who are reading it to let their guard down. It's important to me, because to me, real accessibility kind of comes from a place of like, you can do this too, and here's why. And if you give someone, and again, this is just for my own belief and having trained people to sell $500 blenders, if you throw people a thick book, their eyes are going to glaze over. But you're like, oh, this is how many ever pages it says. It's a short, it's a quick read, it's a fun read. They'll remember it, they'll retain it, and they'll be able to go with it. Because most people I've ever met who've been in games will tell you, it's like, oh yeah, I love these books, I read these books. No, most people don't read these books. Most people
No.
aren't.
I mean,
A fucking page textbook.
It's one of those very strange quirks of the industry, because I think everyone understands that nobody does read books like this cover to cover. That's not
Right.
how they're meant to be consumed. They're not a novel, right? There
Yeah.
is no consistent narrative flow to pull a person through. You hit a
Yeah.
chapter break and suddenly you're in 80 pages of spells. Um, that's just to be flipped through. There's an insane person might sit down and read that cover to cover.
Yeah.
Um, and yet it seems to be for a lot of the industry the primary mode of construction. Um,
Yeah. I mean, is it valuable if it's not 400 pages and a $50 price point? Like, do you feel like your customers or your fans aren't getting their money's worth if you don't give them this like dead tree?
I mean, I get the question, I get the impetus behind it, but
Yeah.
in a big way, I guess what's the value of an RPG, right? For me,
Right.
fundamentally, the value of an RPG is the ideas it creates in my head
Right.
and the experiences it helps me create with my friends.
Exactly.
A big dead tree book is actually an active barrier to both of those.
Right.
Um,
And
the
that's
bigger
kind of
the bigger you give me a book, the less likely I'm going to use it. I'm going to buy it, I'm going to put it on a shelf, and I'm going to acknowledge that I own it, but I basically just paid $50 for a paperweight.
yeah, and that's kind of something that I've always kind of wanted to overcome. Like I can't stand that I need to buy 3 books to really play Dungeons and Dragons or to run a Dungeons and Dragons game. Like to me, that is like the antithesis of fun. So when I started designing the game, I was like, and I said to George, and I was like, what I want to do is I want to be able to create an action movie engine, and that's what 321 Action is. It's an action movie engine, and I want it to be so players can do what they want and they're free to have the fun that they see in movies and the things that make them pop in real life. They can kind of do that stuff, and I want anytime they buy a book, whether it's like the Point Nemo adventure, whether it's a ghost story or whether it's a vampire story or like a crazy, space story or whatever, you're going to get a book. In that book's going to be the rules. So one book, whether you buy this adventure or this adventure, you're going to have everything you need to do in one book. Done. And it's not going to be a big book. It's going to be enough pages to do what you need to do and enjoy yourself. Because I never wanted to be like, well, I want to play this adventure, but now I have to go buy this other book to be able to play this other thing. It's like it's stupid to me, and especially as I get older. Like I just don't see the value. And again, like I'm not saying I don't want to make money, but I just don't see the value in buying a bunch of shit that I'm never going to use, and that like having people who work damn hard for their money have to buy more shit just to use the thing that they bought.
Mm-hmm.
It doesn't make sense to me.
It
So
has never
that's
checked out.
yeah.
I mean, it's interesting to hear you express this. Not that I find it surprising. I mean, it checks out with everything I know about you, but
Yeah.
again, going back, my exposure initially is vintage RPG, which is, if anything, a look back at a great number of games that are very guilty of this kind of original sin, role playing games. Um, Big books, dense, often prohibitively not prohibitively expensive, because honestly, I think a game that's 20 pages could be valued at $50 no problem if I got enough play out of it. But
Of course.
prohibitive in their like density and prohibitive in their lack of accessibility. And a lot of those things are great, right? Like when I can firmly get into Masks of Nyarlathotep, which is a 1,000-page book that takes a year to run through, is an
Yeah.
absolute nightmare of a product, but is a great campaign if you ever can get through it. That's phenomenal. But also, I'm never going to be the guy who buys Masks and reads it and says that was a good experience, because it's not. Um,
Yeah. It's
so
work.
it's work. It's not necessarily even a rewarding work, right? I can read a 700-page book. I am not the guy who dropped out of college. I am the guy who decided I wanted to do even more college. And and like I do genuinely enjoy reading through really information dense tomes, but I don't think what I get is worth it, bang for my buck, when I'm reading a role playing game book
Yeah.
most of the time. Um, but yeah, I mean, what is that like? Is there any kind of cognitive dissonance going back through the history of games and being like, oh God, this could have been done so much better, so much different, so much more accessible.
I definitely think so. Quick little addendum. Stu definitely reads them cover to cover. Stu, I will say, if there's one person I know who actually reads the things, it's Stu. And I know he's read masks. He's actually run masks twice. He's going to do it one more time with
Oof.
his latest group that he's running. He's currently doing Orient Express, I think he said the other day.
Okay.
Stu, Stu loves Chaosium. Stu is, if people are like Beatles and Stones guys, you have, Wizards and Chaosium guys. Stu's definitely a Chaosium guy, so he reads the stuff cover to cover. I think that, to your point about the cognitive dissonance about it, is, for me, full disclosure to anyone listening and watching, like, I got into games later. So Stu's the guy that reads them. I kind of riff on what Stu says, but I have learned a lot about old RPGs by just hanging out with Stu and producing almost 100 episodes of the Vintage RPG podcast. And what I realized, and also going to like a bunch of seminars and talks and people in the industry and stuff.
100 episodes?
Yeah, and the only reason we're not at 100 yet is because when I started the Vintage RPG podcast, I was producing Casual Interactions, My Tai Happy Hour, which was my Casual Interactions was a monthly show. My Tai Happy Hour was a weekly show. Vintage was bi-weekly. Seltzer Squad, when I was producing Seltzer Squad, was weekly. So it took a little bit of moving stuff around to get Vintage RPG to be a weekly show. At one point, I had three weekly shows going. And Seltzer Squad, I stepped away from because I needed to kind of start forging my own path. But Kate and Jess are great, and the show that they continue to do, which also just passed 100 episodes. I dipped out at about 55. Is great for people who are new in their sobriety, people who are older in their sobriety, people who are kind of looking at a different way about it. Seltzer Squad was a great experience, and I was very proud to help to actually start and design that show with Jess and Kate together and come up with it. And then I bowed out when it was time for me to go. Casual Interactions is on indefinite hiatus. My Tai's a live show that is recorded and dumped out, so I don't have to do anything with that. But Vintage, I edit the shit out of. So that's why the episodes are short, because that's a big question that a lot of people ask, is like, why the episode's so short, because it takes a long time to edit and make them sound so good. I don't have the bandwidth and the time to go longer. And also, like, honestly, everyone's like, oh, I wish they were longer. You don't, because if you actually heard all the shit I had to cut out, you will be glad that they're only like 20, 30 minutes, 15 minutes sometimes. But yeah, so that ended up going from bi-weekly to weekly at the end of like year one, and now we're within like a few episodes of 100. I think yours is 98, maybe. But yeah, it's so close. But through that, though, back to what we're talking about, I learned, a lot of the cognitive dissonance, I think, comes from being that RPGs are technically in publishing. They're in publishing of books.
Mm-hmm.
So there is a certain degree of, when you look at a book and you look at what you're selling the MSRP of a book for, and what you get and the page count that you get in like a fantasy novel or like an RPG tome, like you need it to be X amount, so you have the value created by what you're selling. And then there is the other side of it, where I think that those who write it probably have that idea, like, well, if I don't tell them this, they're going to find a way to break the game. Like, because the idea is that these are the rules or suggestions for you to follow, but like, you need to get it all in there. So you're going to cram it all in there. And the third idea, I think, is that like, it hit a point where the iron is hot, so we just got to keep pumping out product to make as much money as we can until things cool down. So it's like a perfect storm of like the three things together.
See, that third one is the one that I think takes the cake of the three, right? When I think about the first, right, video games used to regularly be 70 or 80 bucks a pop in the US, right?
Right.
Values change for these things. Or if I look at hard copy version of like the new Black Library Warhammer 40K book. That
Right.
might be $50 right there, but that's just a novel. There's no good reason why $50 for a trad RPG is the market price, other than it is what the market has established as the price. Um,
Well, one perspective I want to just pitch you real quick, and forgive me for cutting you off, but
no, please.
when you think about it back in like the 80s, even
Hmm.
like even in the 90s, like sure there were hobby shops all across America selling these books, but for books, you are trying to create a value for these books that is worthy of the floor space and say like a B. Dalton bookseller or Walden Books
Sure.
or like a traditional bookstore that is going to be selling these books. And a lot of times, having seen the other side of the business with retailers, like there's a certain thing where you almost can't sell it because this is all pre-Amazon, so there's no
Sure.
like we're just going to fudge the prices here and there, but like you can't sell it for X amount because all these other books and these books that are on this tier are in that range, and if you do that, like you're gonna devalue what they're doing, or you're going to undercut what they're doing. So you're kind of like locked into a certain price point for kind
Sure.
of what you're doing. So as much as like I think there is blame to be laid at the companies who are in the creative side of it, there's also like you're dealing with your key accounts and they're kind of like telling you how to dance if you want that floor space in the
I
B.
mean,
Walden Books.
I don't actually think there's much blame to be put at the feet of most companies. I think there's fundamentally one company who, if Wizards decided that the new MSRP was $100, Amazon, everyone from Amazon to Target to Barnes and Nobles might gripe about it, but there's nothing they could do.
Right.
And frankly, if they did that, the entire industry would either move with them, which would raise prices, or the entire industry would see a sales bump by not moving with them and remaining at a lower price. I don't think anyone has the, I mean, what we call, right? It's monopsony power, right? When you
Right.
when you control the entirety of the selling apparatus. Um, Nobody has monopsony power sufficient enough to change the pricing, except for one company that absolutely does. Um,
I agree with that because their daddy Hasbro,
yeah,
like, and they've been in the game long enough, and they have an IP that's strong enough, and they're the only one. And you're 100% right; they're the only ones that could name the tune that everyone dances to. But it'd be a Pyrrhic victory,
yeah.
because to what end? We're at the end of the bell curve where people are really coming to the game table because of Stranger Things and Critical Role and whatever the flavor of the month is currently that is drawing people to Dungeons and Dragons. Like we're over the hill at this point, and we're about to hit that valley. But I mean, I don't think that they would do it, and it would be a critical mistake. I think if
Oh
they did.
no, I agree.
Yeah, but yeah, I mean, but I think that's what it is. I think a lot of it is it's that it's like we got to strike while the iron's hot. We got to pump out this stuff, you know, and what is the value of a book?
What So, from the sales perspective, right? From
Right.
the business perspective rather than the creative perspective. Um, what is a productive direction forward? Because I do agree with you, right? I am very firmly expecting sometime in the next 5 years something akin to the D20 bust to happen
Yeah.
again.
Oh yeah.
The bottom's gonna fall out. I don't understand. I can barely even fathom a scenario where it doesn't. Um, but where does that leave us, right? If Is there a way to avoid it that you could imagine? And if there isn't, what would a productive, reconstruction effort look like after the thing had fallen apart?
So I think that we reached a really good place, I think, in the games industry where there was a certain degree of rope a dope going on, where you have, like you would say in the music industry, where you have like what's going on up top and what's in Rolling Stone and what is the big names and the big draws happening and what's going on in the underground and how that's growing and how that's getting stronger and how that's getting better and how now we're at a place with technology where before, when say like even doing a zine, right?
Mhm.
You would, if you were lucky, be able to scan it and set it on like whatever program you had on your computer, and you'd either print it yourself or run down to local FedEx Kinko's and get that job done. And you would be beholden to whatever art you could get and who you knew local who could help you out. Now the sky's the limit. Now, because of the internet, because of competitive pricing, because computers and programs are what they are, you can go and you could make a zine that is something that if you saw it on the shelf in a Barnes and Nobles, you wouldn't blink twice because it would look just as good as everything else out there. And I think that we are at a point technologically as a society where the playing field has not been leveled, but the tide is rising for all the ships in the independent scene, where there's enough of them now where we could branch off and bring other people in and maybe make a living, maybe still be able to work in games when the bust happens. And it's not so much like, oh, the champ got beat, party's over. We gotta wait. We gotta wait until it's popular again, because that's ultimately what it comes down to. Whenever there's a bust, something gets too big to fail, and then it does, and then everyone's standing around with their dicks in their hand waiting for the next thing to happen. I don't think that's going to be the case this time around. I think at a high level, because things are changing, especially because the world has changed, and now people are working more on, hey, we're playing over cameras on our computers and on Discord than we are gathering around tables. The paradigm has shifted. And because of that, more people are inclined to be a part of things, and they can be a part of things because it's not limited to anymore. Well, my buddies play D&D every so once in a while, and it's hard to get our schedules to lock up and keep a game going or try something out because of whatever. But now it's like, okay, cool. 7 o'clock, me and my friends got 2 hours before they got to put their kids to bed. We're going to go through an adventure real quick, and everyone's going to feel great about what they did. So I think we're gonna see a lot of cool stuff happening on the indie level, and that indie level has the potential to rise up to that next level. Not obviously, Daddy Hasbro level, but like,
I mean,
a good place.
I
I
think
believe.
I think it's what I'm about to say is objectively pretty fucked up, but I'm going to say it anyway. Um, I think the best lifeline the industry could have been thrown was COVID.
Oh, 100%. Terrible that you have to say, but it's true.
Yeah.
It's yeah.
If this year hadn't gone, I was having a very similar conversation with a friend of mine at Unplugged last year, and I don't think the fundamentals have changed regarding the shift I see coming for Hasbro, but also just large trad publishers. But I think the environment changed in a way, one, nobody could have really expected. Um,
Right.
but two, in for this very specific niche, like a wildly positive way. One, because it's forced everyone to become very comfortable with forms of play that were very edge case before. Playing role playing games online is a pretty much until this year a wild proposition
Yeah.
for most people. Now it is fairly normative. But also, I think it's increased that desperation for face to face, which
Oh.
has always been the
Oh.
real premium of analog games over digital games.
Yeah.
And so I think I think you're right. What you're probably going to see is the top collapsing, the bottom rising, and what I hope is a pricing dynamic shift. Um, because of that, because we now have a sense of what an 80-page game book should sell for,
Right.
and that value keeps rising. Right, I keep looking at Kickstarters and seeing more and more games that 5 years ago, if they were Kickstarter, would sell for $5-10 like physical, 25-30 now, which is awesome. I love seeing that. I can't wait
Yeah.
until I get a tiny zine that's priced for $50,
Yeah.
because I want the value of that thing to be accurately represented, and I think that does only happen when the top collapses.
I agree with you. I think that um, to a degree, when we come out of this, and it's not if, it's when we come out of this, and we are going to come out of this together, people are still going to be playing online. People are still going to be, doing what we've been doing online, because now you kind of can't go back, because now you're actually getting to play more than you used to get to play. But man, when we can get back around the table again and hug and order a pizza and share a fucking pizza, like that's the thing I think I miss the most about playing games with my friend, is ordering pizza and just sitting around and shooting the breeze. But we will get back to that. I like the idea of charging what things are worth. I'm not diminishing the value that goes into making that book, because you got to pay artists, you got to pay editors, you got to pay everyone. Anybody who works on something should be paid what they're worth for the job that they do and what they ask for, and because you earn that. And a lot of people, I think, get, and I learned this from my days in like the music business. It's just like, I played a gig with this one dude once years ago, and he was in another band, and the show was great, and we got paid like $400 something. I don't know. And we split it between the bands. And the dude was like, yeah, we got paid, man. This is awesome. And we're all looking at this guy like, that doesn't happen all the time. And that is not money that is like, we got paid. That's money that like is going to pay us back for the gas of the show, strings for the guitars, the practice space, the flyers, all this other stuff. Like, we're still way in debt with that $100. Like, I just, people don't really, many people don't really get the fact that people work very hard, and it's not just what you're paying for is not just what they did. You're paying for the hours that it took them to be good enough to do the thing you're paying them for. So, I'm a huge proponent of making sure people get paid what they're worth. I generally never haggle with anybody. And if I can't afford it, I just tell them I can't afford it and I move on. I'm not going to sit here and diminish a person's value when they tell me what the job costs.
I'm in complete agreement. I will say, just because I think the not the counterpoint, but as a separate philosophy that's equally valid, right? I do respect artists who decide what they want to do is, pay what they want, or pay what you want, or community copies, which have become a big thing. I sell X number of free, or I sell X number of full price copies, and then this number of community copies becomes available. I do very much like things like it's the natural good of a museum or the natural good of a library.
Of course, yeah.
But at the same time, a library pays for the books that you check out. And so at the end of the day, like it's the classic argument, like, well, libraries don't actually help artists or writers. No, that's not true. They love when their stuff is in the library. Like that's phenomenal for them. That's actually way better than them getting a huge lot bought by Barnes and Nobles and then them having to pay back when those books don't sell. That sucks for artists and writers.
That's a sale. That's a hardcore, no take back sale. That's awesome.
And so I would like to see a version of that. Maybe it just comes with scale. Maybe it comes with time. I don't know. But I think there does need to be people paying for what the work is worth, as well as a system for allowing people who can't afford that to still partake in the art.
I wholeheartedly agree with that. And I think that my thought on that is, like, when it comes to like an artist or someone who wants to do the job, like, tell me what you want me to pay, I will pay it. If you choose to charge me less because this is what you want to do, that's your choice. But I'm ready to pay what you're going to tell me to pay. And I think that, one of the things I definitely like, I plan on doing with my thing is always having like a version of it, like even just like a rule set and something that people can just snag off of like drive through or wherever as a PDF, because in the end of the day, like, it doesn't hurt me that people are checking out the thing that I'm doing. And for me, like, again, I want to make money because I want to keep making product, and I would hopefully one day make enough money to not have to eat cat food when I retire. But like, I want people to check it out. I want people to play it. I want people to laugh and pop their friends with it and like have a good time with it. So like, to me, there'll always be some kind of, once it's actually out there, something for people to be able to check out for free. It might not be a print copy because, that is what it is. But the fact that someone could bring it up on their phone or their computer and be like, okay, I can read this, I can run this, I can play this. I think that I agree with you. I think that's such an important thing to have out there is the people who might not be able to just go out and buy it, who see value in it, giving them the ability to play it. I think everyone should do that in some way.
Yeah, I was gonna. I don't have a follow up. I just agree. I
Yeah.
just that is yes. Where where do you see that being done the best right now?
I don't know. I don't know. It's I tend to, and I guess this is me not having looked at it before like this, but I guess for me, like when the shit hit the fan with the pandemic, companies like Wizards and other companies were like saying, "Hey, here's free to play stuff. Here's free to play stuff. Here's free to play stuff. Modules. Here's the PDF for the D&D starter kit and whatever." I think there's stuff that's out there if you look for it, and I think that the companies that are going to be better about it are going to be better about it when they have to be because of stuff like
Yeah.
COVID. But that when you have a true passion for that, like Marie Enger, like she's like, oh, here's the basic rules for Casket Land. Anyone who wants them, just
Take them.
go.
Yeah.
When you truly want to do that for people, you will let people know, and those will be the people who may not have the loudest voices, but they're going to make the most impact because when someone catches that eye and says, "Oh my gosh, that's here! I can try this out," and then that's cool, man. That's
Yeah.
cool.
It's very rare in my experience in my line of work for somebody to get started on a game with their first point of contact being picking it up and buying it themselves.
Right.
It's someone introducing them, and you follow that path back far enough, and it's usually somebody who got a free trial or played a con game.
Yeah.
Sales come after the exposure.
Yeah, and it's such a weird when you say it, and it's the most true statement in the world. It's just always like, as a person who's in the arts, it like when you hear the word exposure, you're just like, oh, you get kind of, the hairs in the back of your neck stand up. But it's true, like you need to get out there, you need to get that exposure because sales come from exposure. But don't ever ask me to work for exposure because I will smack you.
There you go. No, it's an important distinction, right? Like exposure is work. You shouldn't have to work for exposure. But at the same time, without exposure, you don't make sales.
Yeah, 100%.
Something that you do in various aspects of your life is you do shine spotlights on things that you find cool, which I've always appreciated.
Thanks, man.
The question I kind of always ask people, especially this time of year, because it's the holidays and maybe people didn't buy them gifts, but they probably bought themselves gifts. What by somebody else has you excited right now?
Yeah, lots of stuff. For me, I never saw the point in trying to keep secrets about the things that you like, because if more people like it, then like you get to talk to someone about it.
Yeah.
And I've never seen the point in like, I guess, I want to walk that back a little bit. I think like in the early 2000s in the scene where every band is like, or it's a scene, we're all in this together, but everyone is like stabbing each other in the back and like cutthroat because everyone is fighting to get that deal because that's all you know to do at that point. Like, yeah, we've all been shitbags. However, once you turn like 22, 23 and you see there's value in other things, it's important to put people over. And it's important to put people over with the expectation of nothing in return. Because if you like something, you should be a mark for it. You should champion it. You should tell people about it. Because if it excites you, that's the coolest thing in the world. So like, I love Casket Land. I love Marie Enger. So whenever she puts something out, like I'm always retweeting, or if if something is out, I'll put a swipe up in my Instagram stories about it, because like, what the fuck is the point of having a swipe up in your Instagram stories if you can't help other people out?
Yeah.
Like, and I will always to the death on Marie. Banana Chan, anything Banana Chan puts out, like, I admire her so incredibly much in the work Banana's done. I will tell you that, like, whenever she puts out something new, I'll always give it a swipe up. Levi from Planet X, like, just people who I've chat with in real life and I've got friendships with, over the internet, and just when we run into each other, where, like, I know I can reach out to them and I can ask them a question. Anything Adam Vass does, like, I am a person who will always be in admiration of others who get off their asses and do something productive and do something cool, and like, who let their passion shine, because that's something that I do, and that's something that is important to me, is not just sitting back and being complacent. Like, even if I'm your sidekick and I'm going to make you look real good, I'm doing it because I fully believe in what's going on here. So yeah, anything by Banana Chan, Marie, Adam Vass, Levi. I love the game Mixtape Massacre. I love what they do with that board game. Just whatever they put out, I'll just buy it all the time. I've fallen into a bad hole with Prospero Hall because they keep putting out like really easy to learn, fun to play games that you could play with like really no hard barrier to entry, and everyone's gonna have a laugh. Everyone's gonna have a good time. Yeah, I mean, it's been weird. I would put over bands and stuff, but no one's really. Wildlife put out Year of the Snake, which is pretty cool.
Yeah, I mean, this is not only games. Just like, what's got you hype?
Yeah, Homeless Gospel Choirs, This Is Your Landfill is like a masterpiece for this year. It's hard because for me, and I don't know if you feel the same way. Like, I don't even know what happened this year anymore, because it feels like everything has happened and nothing has happened. And like, did I see that movie in a theater? Was that this year? Like, I just don't know. But yeah, I just always, if someone's doing something cool, I'll put them over. If there's if you're cool and you put out something cool, I'm always just happy to put you over. My buddy Sean Simon, he writes amazing comic books. He's got some real cool stuff coming out. I think the Electric Century graphic novel comes out, got pushed to next year now, but like, I don't know, man. I just want to see other people who work their asses off get their day, get to shine, and be successful, and have the hard work and the heart that they put into things rewarded by people enjoying it like I enjoy it. So,
amen to that. Just make rad shit better known.
That's it. That's my whole thing, man. Be excellent to each other. Put your friends over. I just wish I knew what happened this year. I don't know. I don't know what came out.
No, I completely understand. I was going through one of those big Twitter threads of like, what was the worst discourse this year, and I could have swore most of that was from like 2 years ago.
Yeah. What did you say on Twitter? It was a few weeks. It might have been a few weeks back. Who knows at this point? But who's the new villain of the day on Twitter? Or who's the Twitter bad guy?
Oh, that's the. I mean, I think I was probably just riffing on a very classic tweet, which is there's like one goal in the game of Twitter every day, to not be the main character.
That's what it was.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. Pretty much.
Yeah.
All right. I'm trying to think. Is there anything you want to shout out? Is there anything you want to get into? I'm still good to go for a while, but my brain is just.
I got nothing, man. I got nothing but time tonight. Yeah, you know what, man? I will tell you, like, discourse is a funny thing, and it's something I just generally try to steer clear from, because, obviously, it's a vacuum. It's a time suck, and it's just kind of like I never actually see anything getting better or anything changing by people kind of arguing about it. But what definitely does jazz me up is the people I see the most who are into the Twitter discourse, constantly putting out like killer product and getting like excited about stuff. I don't know, man. I think like the thing I want to see the most, next year obviously is like a return to like leaving our apartments and like hugging. But I also think that, people being home as much as we have definitely puts us in a real rad position to capitalize on that time and have made the best of it. And on the flip side of that, like I've been telling a lot of people this, and this is kind of my big takeaway from, I think, 2020, and that's show up, do your best. You know, a lot of people go into a new year and it's like new year, new me. It's, to me, it's always been like new year, same asshole. But I think that we put too much pressure on ourselves to make changes and to do things differently, and like never really analyze why we are where we are in the first place. And also, especially after a year where, like, you know, if you are a therapist in the year 2021 through 2023, like, you're never going to go without work because we're all going to need it. That we got beat up this year. Like, I think that there is so much dignity in getting out of bed in the morning, and there's so much dignity to hard work, and there's so much, you know, courage that it takes to get in there and go another round. That, like, I think instead of, like, you know, you have the self-help gurus and the people who are like, you know, all the motivational quotes and you need to do this and you do that. Like, if you show up and you do your best, you've already done more than you need to do. And anything else that happens after that is gravy. So, like, I think that if I did have a message to people, the thing I think I really want people to know is that, like, totally okay, just show up and do your best.
I mean, I would just cut off the end. It's totally okay just to show up.
Yeah, that's it. Exactly. Either or.
Yeah, total agreement. My saying for a long time that I've kept in my mind is make weird shit, make shit weird.
Yeah.
And that's the energy I try to put in. However tired I am, however bad my depression is rearing up, how many hours I spend in bed before I finally roll out of it and literally fall onto the floor. Um, if I can, if I can just make one weird thing in that day,
Yeah.
I'm good. That has been a successful day. I put a little more strangeness into the world.
Fucking amen, brother. The minute your feet hit the floor, you win.
There you go.
That's it.
All right. Well, with that, I think is a lovely send-off message to a deeply depressed world. On this very soon to be the eve of our end of 2020, the bad, not good year.
Yeah.
I think that's a good send-off. I think that's a good goodbye.
Right on, man.
It was a pleasure talking to you. We've spoken twice in like a week. It was great.
Yeah, dude. I always love talking to you, man. I'm always happy when we can get together and rip a game, and we definitely got to get together soon and play some games
Totally.
again. I know.
I have been invited to several playtests of your game and have been just the flakiest bitch about them. And I gotta one of these days.
After playing Casketland with you the other day, I realized that you are going to have the most fun playing my game.
Okay.
It's I can almost promise you
All
you're
right.
gonna have fun.
I believe it implicitly.
Right on, man.
All right. Well, Hambone, lovely as always. I'll talk to you soon, bud.
Stay safe out there, man. Take care.
Peace.